It's time to return to the world of Android, and this time we're back with REDMAGIC and their brand new 11 Pro, which promises to take their gaming-focused mobile devices to the next level with the latest and greatest from Qualcomm, the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5. But that's not all, as REDMAGIC returns with their signature features, as well as some neat new tricks, including the world's first mass-produced smartphone with liquid cooling, and some other key features that might make this their best one yet. So please join me, Rob the Retro Tech Dad, as we dive into the 11 Pro to explore what the new Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 brings to the table and whether or not 11 Pro can live up to REDMAGIC's bold vision of unrivaled gaming experiences. First things first, let's go over the specs, price, and do a quick unboxing and tour of the REDMAGIC 11 Pro. And the package no doubt is very REDMAGIC in its style, with the label on the side that lets us know that we are in fact getting the 11 Pro. And what makes this an 11 Pro starts with what's under the hood, with the new Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 chipset that is the next generation of the Snapdragon 8 Elite seen in the prior REDMAGIC 10 Pro models. With this chipset comes a host of improved performance and power efficiency, and features a third generation Orion CPU with speeds up to 4.6 GHz and an Adreno 840 GPU with speeds up to 1.2 GHz. Now, part of the improved efficiency comes with the new 3nm Pro node, and we will definitely examine what this means for battery life later on in that section. We see the return of REDMAGIC's signature full-screen experience with their under-screen technology that features a 6.85-inch AMOLED display at a resolution of 2688 by 1216 with a 95.3% screen-to-body ratio, up to 144Hz refresh rate, and 1800 nits max brightness, with a 100% DCI P3 wide color gamut. And as is the norm for REDMAGIC devices, we have several configurations and options, which starts with their Cryo model that features 12GB of LPDDR5T RAM and 256GB of UFS 4.1 Pro storage. It moves up with their Night Freeze and Sub-Zero models that feature either 16GB of LPDDR5T RAM and 512GB of UFS 4.1 Pro storage, or 24GB of LPDDR5T RAM and 1TB of UFS 4.1 Pro storage. As is typical with the REDMAGIC lineup, we do not have any expandable storage with a microSD slot, and so it's important to keep this in mind when making a decision. Now, on board we have Wi-Fi 7 with what REDMAGIC claims is a 360-degree antenna, as well as Bluetooth 5.4, USB 3.2 Gen 2 for data, charging, and video out, a 3.5mm audio port, NFC support, and a 3D ultrasonic fingerprint unlock. On the front, we have the return of the 16MP under-display camera, and on the back, the return of the 50MP rear camera system with optical image stabilization that, like prior generations of REDMAGIC devices, has no bump outs and retains the flat design, which is always something that I've personally liked about the REDMAGIC devices. Now, obviously this comes at a cost, since the cameras are nothing spectacular, and given the 11 Pro's focus as a gaming-centric device, these are more than serviceable, but obviously if the best camera quality is desired, I would recommend something else in the space. Out of the box, we have REDMAGIC 11.0, which is powered by Android 16, and somehow REDMAGIC has managed to pack a larger battery in the same size chassis as the prior generation, increasing capacity to 7500 mAh, and yet again features 80W wired and wireless fast charging. And for the first time, two-way reverse charging, as well as support for charging separation. As always, we will examine what this all means for battery life later on during my battery rundown tests. In the package, REDMAGIC does include an 80W power adapter to support the wired fast charging, as well as the signature REDMAGIC branded red USB-C to C cable, a SIM tool, and an improved clear case that now protects all around the device. The REDMAGIC 11 Pro will be available directly from the REDMAGIC website, with early bird vouchers available for purchase from November 12th through the 18th, which gives you access to purchasing on November 18th. For the general public, open sales will begin on November 19th. The 11 Pro will be available globally in many regions including North America, Europe, the UK, Asia, and many more, which are displayed on screen. Pricing for the 11 Pro begins at $749 for the base Cryo model with 12GB of RAM and 256GB of storage, and then goes up to $849 for either the Night Freeze or Sub-Zero models with 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage, and finally $999 for the top tier model with 24GB of RAM and 1TB of storage. The full range of prices globally can be seen on screen for the applicable region. I'd like to thank REDMAGIC for providing the 11 Pro in advance so that I can conduct my usual in-depth testing, and as always, this video was not reviewed prior to publishing. There's no doubt that when looking at the 11 Pro, it immediately is recognizable as a REDMAGIC device, and much of the design language from prior generations is carried over to the 11 Pro, including the flat back design, RGB lighting that is found throughout the phone, including the fan, shoulder triggers, logo, and now even the side frame. The shoulder triggers return better than ever with a 520Hz response rate and even support for portrait mode gameplay. We've got upgraded stereo speakers that combined with the haptics really deliver a pretty incredible sound that gets very loud on that tap end, and for a mobile device is quite immersive and impressive. The 11 Pro feels premium in the hands with its aluminum alloy midframe for durability, and we do see the return of the all-glass design for the back, at least on the Sub-Zero and Night Freeze models, which is the one that I have on hand here, and it allows you to visually see the new liquid cooling system. And I'm kinda always torn on this design element, since while it's very cool visually, it does pick up on fingerprints quite a bit. Now luckily this is mitigated by the included case that does reduce this issue. The base Cryo model shouldn't have an issue with this since it does not have the glass design on the back, but naturally it loses out on that transparent design. And like prior generations, we have the return of the dedicated Magic Key, and as always is customizable to either open and exit game space, or things like your camera, flashlight, voice recorder, or the ability to switch the sound mode on the fly, which can all be changed within the settings. And finally, we still have the great BOE designed display that is completely free of any camera cutouts and provides a full screen gaming experience with a whopping 430 ppi thanks to its resolution of 2688 by 1216, which results in images that are sharp, and the colors and quality of the panel is very noticeable and quite striking in person. This still remains one of my favorite features of the REDMAGIC devices, and really makes gaming on a display like this quite enjoyable. But really, when you think about REDMAGIC devices, it always comes back to the gaming-focused cooling features, and this time around, REDMAGIC returns with a host of improvements to their prior generations. For the first time ever, we have a waterproof and dustproof fan that spins at 24,000 RPMs, which REDMAGIC claims is the fastest turbofan in the industry. The liquid metal and vapor chamber are better than ever before with another leading industry design that features the largest vapor chamber in a mobile device, which covers 13,116mm squared, and the liquid metal which is placed right above the vapor chamber for quickly transferring heat from the CPU to the vapor chamber. Now this all comes together for a brand new addition to the REDMAGIC lineup, and for the first time ever with the 11 Pro, we see the inclusion of liquid cooling, which is designed to draw heat away from the battery and help with long-term stability under heavy loads. Of course, this is pretty wild to see in a device the size of the 11 Pro, given the size constraints. REDMAGIC had to figure out miniaturization of this technology, the combination of the piezoelectric ceramic micropump, micron level laser cutting, which allowed them to integrate ultra-fine liquid channels, and the use of an anti-freezing coolant, which is both non-conducive and completely leak-proof in a fully sealed system, has allowed REDMAGIC to somehow pack this all into the 11 Pro. This is fully on display in the back on the Sub-Zero and Night Freeze models, and it's wild to see it working, and it's almost mesmerizing to look at. But let's see how it actually performs in the real world, and whether or not this entire combination has any meaningful impacts on thermals. So let's first take a look at some quick benchmarks of the REDMAGIC 11 Pro, and for this I use the Rise preset, and with the Geekbench 6 benchmark, the 11 Pro managed almost 12,000 for the multi-core score, and 3,717 for the single-core score, with over 8,000 for the Wildlife Extreme benchmark, and finally an overall score of 3,603,750 for the Antutu benchmark. Now the big thing I wanted to look at was the thermal stability with the 11 Pro, since not only do we have an improved vapor chamber, But we also have an improved fan as well as the liquid cooling, and this is where things kind of get interesting. So I ran the Wildlife Extreme stress test in various scenarios just to compare and see what kind of impact the fan and the liquid cooling has on the 11 Pro. And the results might be surprising. But if you've seen my videos on the REDMAGIC Astra and Nova, you will know that this isn't entirely unusual. Okay, so the 11 Pro with the Rise preset running the 20-minute Wildlife Extreme benchmark with both the liquid cooling and fast fan enabled came in with a stability percentage of 84.1, which is actually really solid for a mobile device under this load. Now, of course, I let the 11 Pro rest in between tests so that things were pretty even across the board. And so let's see how the 11 Pro did when I ran the same test, but this time I turned off the fan, and so we are only relying on the liquid cooling, and the stability percentage wasn't that much lower at 81.6%. Then for my next test, I turned off the liquid cooling circulation and used just the fast cooling fan option, and we came in with an 82.7% stability score. And finally, with neither the fan or liquid cooling options enabled, we had an 82% stability score. So this tells me a few things. First off, the vapor chamber is definitely doing most of the work here and is very effective, since with neither the liquid cooling circulation or fan enabled, we are still maintaining a pretty strong thermal stability percentage. It also tells me that the fan and liquid cooling might be a little bit of a gimmick, which again we've seen before in the REDMAGIC Nova and Astra. Now, it's important to remember that the liquid cooling is actually meant more for the battery, and to help draw heat away from that specifically. The other important thing to keep in mind is that this is just a 20-minute stress test, and it's very likely that the liquid cooling and fan are helpful to maintain long-term performance, which we will see in my battery testing. Okay, so before we finally dive into some native Android gaming and emulation, let's gear up as always and check out some telescopic controller options for the REDMAGIC 11 Pro. Now thankfully, since this is a mobile phone, we have many telescopic options that will work great with this device, which you can see on screen here, like the REDMAGIC Shadow Blade 2, ABXYLUTE S9, Razer Kishi Ultra, ROG Tessin, and countless others which work very well in terms of how they fit with the 11 Pro. So if you have one of these many options, you should be all good to go. There are a few new options that I wanted to quickly show off, but the reality is that most should work without issue, whether or not you're looking for a Bluetooth or wired USB-C solution. Now I've rounded up the REDMAGIC branded Shadow Blade 3, which I couldn't show off for my REDMAGIC Astra video since I didn't have it in hand then, the Gamesir X5 Lite, ABXYLUTE S8, the 8-bit DO Ultimate Mobile Gaming Controller, and finally the Backbone Pro controller. So the REDMAGIC Shadow Blade 3 is a Bluetooth option that really looks slick with the 11 Pro, and since this is a Bluetooth option that can connect as an Xbox controller, it works without issue in games like Call of Duty Mobile. The Shadow Blade 3 is pretty pricey at around $119 US, mostly thanks to its REDMAGIC branding, but there is the Gamesir X5S, which the Shadow Blade 3 is actually based on, and is about half the price and essentially the same thing if you're looking for a cheaper option. The Shadow Blade 3 does use micro switches for its D-pad and face buttons, so if you prefer that over a membrane style which the X5S uses, it's something worth considering. Now, one cool thing about both of these controllers is the support for the thermoelectric cooler that is designed to work with this, and also features a magnetic battery pack, so you don't need to have it powered separately by a USB-C cable. It's obviously a great addition to help keep your device cooler for even better thermal management. But if you're looking for a very no-frills type of controller that also happens to support USB-C, the Gamesir X5 Lite is a fantastic option that is very inexpensive at around $35 US. Honestly, this controller will probably serve most people's needs as a great solution that remains compact and surprisingly well made. It's one I have featured before since I just love it as a recommendation for a budget option that lets you get into gaming with these telescopic controllers without a big investment. And while we are talking about some inexpensive and solid options, the new ABXYLUTE S8 is another one to consider that comes in at around $55 US, but is also one of the larger options that I am showing off here, which features full-size membrane buttons and full-size analog sticks. This is a Bluetooth solution, so it also has the ability to connect as an Xbox wireless controller for games like Call of Duty Mobile. I really like the ergonomics on this one, and again, it's just a solid option that doesn't break the bank. I also wanted to bring back 8-bit DO's Ultimate Mobile Gaming Controller, which, like the ABXYLUTE S8, is one of the larger options that I am showing off here, but also a really nice and inexpensive solution that comes in around $40 US and features great ergonomics, full-size Hall effect analog sticks and triggers, face buttons, and a very satisfying micro switch D-pad. This is a Bluetooth option, but unfortunately doesn't work out of the box with games like Call of Duty without the use of some type of mapping software. Finally, on the completely opposite end of the price spectrum, I have the fairly new Backbone Pro, which is slightly bigger than the original model, but does feature much better ergonomics, full-size analog sticks, a membrane-based base buttons and D-pad, triggers, and is a USB-C solution. It's a fairly compact solution that I do enjoy using, but it's very hard for me to recommend to most as it's very pricey at $170 US, which makes it the most expensive option here, and so this is just more to demonstrate how it fits and looks with the 11 Pro. And that's one thing that is true for all the controllers I've shown here, which all accommodate the 11 Pro very well with or without its included case, and so any of these will be solid solutions. Just make sure to keep your use cases in mind since not all of them will work with games like Call of Duty Mobile or PUBG out of the box. Okay, so we're all geared up, let's get into the good stuff and finally check out some native Android gaming first, and then we will save the emulation for the second part of the game's showcase. The Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is a very powerful chipset, and given how much we were able to accomplish with the prior generation using the 8 Elite, it's probably not all that surprising that essentially everything that is available natively on Android won't have too much trouble running here with the 11 Pro. And in some cases, we can even turn back the performance presets to help with battery efficiency as well. It goes without saying that games like Wuthering Waves, which is definitely one way to push the hardware, does very well with the 11 Pro, with the graphics preset set to quality, with the frame rate adjusted to 60 frames per second. But thanks to REDMAGIC's game space frame interpolation feature, we can run WUA here at a silky smooth 120 frames per second, with the high resolution option, and it's just remarkable how beautiful and smooth this game performs here. And for a fairly new release, and a game I don't think I've shown off here on the channel just yet, we've got Destiny Rising, which is the mobile take on the Destiny franchise and a surprisingly very well done and faithful experience to Destiny. I mentioned that with the power overhead of the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5, we could probably get away with a different performance preset, and here with Destiny Rising, I am set to use the balanced performance preset, but the game is running here at 90 frames per second with the ultra rendering quality. And just like WUA is an incredibly smooth and visually pleasing experience here with the 11 Pro. We're not quite done with shooters, and of course we have to check out Call of Duty Mobile, which is a game that performs well on many high-end devices, so it's not much of a surprise that the 11 Pro really doesn't struggle at all with this game. Call of Duty Mobile is another game that supports REDMAGIC's frame interpolation feature in the game space, so we can run this game at 120 frames per second using the ultra frame rate setting in-game, which does automatically set the in-game graphics to medium quality. Honestly, I hope the developers just fully unlock all of these features for devices with the 8 Elite Gen 5, since the reality is that there is more than enough power on hand here to handle the high frame rates and highest graphical quality. Delta Force is another very fun shooter that gets a lot right, being very intense and exciting with incredibly smooth gameplay, and this is a game that also makes great use of the high refresh rate display with 120 frames per second using these standard settings, and again a game that could probably be fully unlocked for the 8 Elite Gen 5 and the 11 Pro, which has absolutely no issues handling this game with great performance that is very smooth regardless of what is happening on screen. Finally, let's close this native Android gaming showcase out with a pair of premium paid games, which is always something that I like to do in this segment as a way to show off some interesting games available on the Play Store that are well worth the money. It goes without saying that the port of Subnautica to Android is definitely one of those worthwhile experiences that runs like a dream here with the 11 Pro, using the balanced performance preset with the in-game settings set to the high landscape detail, the absurdly high resolution option, and the 60 frames per second cap, and again, it's just remarkable how well the game runs here. And Bright Memory Infinite is a game that I have featured before on the channel, but it's an awesome shooter, it has high quality and a premium experience with some really impressive visuals that supports 120 frames per second in-game natively, and like every other game featured here, runs very well with the 11 Pro using 100% resolution and all of the fancy features like shadow quality, SSAO, and water reflection turned on. And this one does stay at 120 frames per second, which is actually very impressive for this game. But the reality is that emulation still remains one of the best ways to really show off the extra oomph that comes with a new chipset like the 8 Elite Gen 5. And I think it goes without saying that essentially 6th generation consoles and earlier will absolutely be no issue here on the 11 Pro, and the only real limitation at this point is the emulator itself. But our usual candidates like God of War 2 for the PlayStation 2 using Nether SX2, with this game set to use 5 times the native PlayStation 2 resolution, with the Rise preset, and the game runs very well, and it's definitely overkill for the 11 Pro given the resolution on hand here, which means that if you turn down the upscaling, you can easily run this using a more efficient setting like the Eco preset, and we will find out in just a little bit what that actually means for battery life. The same can be said for the Gamecube and Wii, with both consoles having really no issues running with this chipset and the 11 Pro, and I have both F-Zero GX for the Gamecube and Super Mario Galaxy 2 for the Wii, both using the Dolphin emulator straight from the Google Play Store, and with both of these games we are set to the max resolution upscaling, which is 6 times the native Gamecube and Wii resolution, and it's not a problem for either of these games, with F-Zero GX using the Balanced Performance preset, and Mario Galaxy 2 using the Rise preset. Again, it goes without saying that maxing out the upscaling is definitely very extreme, and again, you can easily adjust down to save on battery life. And while we're on the subject of Nintendo consoles, let's quickly check out some Wii U emulation with the Sinu emulator for Android, and I always like to use Fast Racing Neo as one of my test games, since it's one of the few games that can actually be set to utilize a 120 frames per second cap that works very well, and I believe this will be the first time that I've seen this game stay this consistently locked to that 120 frames per second target, while using a higher resolution at 1080p, and with the Rise preset we have the power to handle this, and I believe this is even better than what I experienced with the 8 Elite on prior REDMAGIC devices. And more recently we've had some very exciting developments for the 8 Elite chipset when it comes to Switch emulation, with the recently released Eden emulator that is now on version 0.0.4 with release candidate 1 that specifically focuses on improving compatibility with the stock Qualcomm drivers for the 8 Elite chipset. The good news is that this also translates to the newer 8 Elite Gen 5 chipset, and just the improvements in compatibility and performance have been nothing short of amazing. And it's just a beautiful thing to see these chipsets really show off their capabilities, which in the past I've shown off some glimpses of what the potential is like for them. I started off, as I usually do, with some lighter games that are favorites of mine, like Ball Pit and Hades 2, which work incredibly well here with Eden, and both are set to use 2 times the native Switch resolution in dock mode, which means we are at a 4K resolution, and the craziest part of this all is that we are only using the Eco preset with the 11 Pro, and these 2 games run incredibly well. I mean, honestly, this alone makes me so excited about what's to come, and thankfully, I was able to pull myself away from Ball Pit, which I am absolutely hooked on, and now own this game on 3 different platforms so that I can actually go check out performance with some more demanding experiences. Naturally, I had to check out a Mario game, and for this showcase I decided to go with Super Mario Odyssey, which I think is a good demonstration of the power we have on hand here, as well as the fact that this game really has no major issues right out of the box with the native Qualcomm drivers. I have Super Mario Odyssey set to use the native Switch resolution, but in docked mode, so we are at 1080p, and we are only set to use the Eco preset here with the 11 Pro, and that is absolutely wild to me. I did a battery test for the first time ever with Mario Odyssey, using this Eco preset setting because I was just curious what this meant in terms of battery performance. Now you might be wondering why I didn't go with a 2x upscaling to see how much we could push this game, and unfortunately that is still an issue that remains with certain games when you go beyond the native resolution. This issue is present as well in a game like Tears of the Kingdom, but that doesn't mean that I still didn't test this game out, and this is another one that pretty much worked out of the box with the native Qualcomm drivers, using the native Switch resolution but in docked mode for that 1080p resolution. I am set to use the Rise preset here, and the reason for that is the extra power that we get with it has really allowed the massive amount of shader compilation in this game to be less of an issue than it usually is, especially when you're talking about devices with less power to work with. We have a lot of power on hand with the 8 Elite Gen 5 to essentially just brute force much of the shader compilation. Now there seems to be an issue that requires the shader cache to be deleted before starting up the game again, but not as much of an issue because of this fact. This version of Eden introduces very important updates for the Elite chipset, which it's clear that the 8 Elite Gen 5 is benefiting from, but it's also a release candidate version, so it does have bugs. The issue with Tears of Kingdom crashing after the intro is something that still seems to persist, but you can bypass this by loading up a save that occurs right after that. Regardless, it's amazing to see the progress for the Elite chips, and the Gen 5 chip is really doing quite well already. I'm just excited to see the progress from here, and I may have to dive in deeper. And speaking of diving in deeper, PlayStation 3 emulation with RPCSX is something that I've covered quite a bit here on the channel, and I recently did a very in-depth look at RPCSX with the Snapdragon 8 Elite, and much of that carries over to the new 8 Elite Gen 5, so it serves as a very useful reference for what you could potentially expect from the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 when it comes to PlayStation 3 emulation. Of course, I had to load up a few of my favorites, including Resogun, which always serves as one of my first test games to get a good feel for performance, and Wow, let me tell you, performance is what you're getting here, because Resogun and even games like Dragon Ball, Xenoverse, and Devil May Cry 4 are all running here at a 300% resolution upscaling, which means we are at a 4K resolution for PlayStation 3 on an Android device. In some cases, lighter games like Resogun can almost handle this at full speed with just the balance preset. But one thing's for sure, that Rise preset crushes these settings with absolutely impressive performance. I mean seriously, it's Resogun in 4K. I will say that Devil May Cry 4 was where we started to see some of the limitations of the chipset, at least with that 300% upscaling, where it would have some dips because of shader compilation. But performance is still very solid overall, and again, 4K is just absolutely overkill for this, but cool nonetheless. As much as I love everything I've seen with RPCSX, Eden, and whatnot, I have to say what I was most excited about is testing PC gaming on Android with awesome apps like Winlator and Gamehub, which have come so far in such little time to really allow us to make full use of the available hardware and power in devices like the 11 Pro. I spent the most time here with my testing, and I wish I could just show off everything, but I had to keep it limited for the purpose of this review because of time. But let me just say that we are really getting very close here for some of the much more high-end experiences, and honestly, a lot of the lighter indie games will absolutely be no issue for this chipset as long as it's compatible with something like Winlator or Gamehub. But I was blown away by how well games like Final Fantasy VII Remake ran here with the 11 Pro using the Rise preset. I have this game set at a 720p resolution, and the frame rate was pretty variable between 30 to 60 frames per second, and so for this footage I just left it capped at 30 to keep it as smooth of an experience as possible and with low settings. I'd say it's very solid overall and looks amazing. Now I love my racing games, and The Crew 2 is actually a game I've taken some interest in recently, since they finally introduced an offline mode, and this is one that I didn't expect to run as well as it does here with Gamehub using the Rise preset on the 11 Pro, and the game is set to use a 1080p resolution with the frame rate locked at 30 frames per second, with about an 80% res scaling using low settings. Again, I'm just blown away that this works at all, let alone this well. Now obviously it's always important to keep your expectations in check, and while it's very exciting, and this is an area that will continue to improve, there is a limit to just how much can be done, and I'd say something like God of War is probably where we see this start to show the limitations of what we can realistically get away with. But again, I was actually playing through this despite some of the obvious dips in frame rate and just compromises that needs to be made here to get a game like God of War running, but regardless, this is very impressive to see at all. I've got the 11 Pro set to the Rise preset with God of War at a 720p resolution, and it's so very close to staying at 30 frames per second, with low settings and AMD FSR set to ultra performance. I mean, at the end of the day, it's God of War on a mobile phone. How cool is that? Finally, because it's almost a requirement, I did check out gameplay with Grand Theft Auto 5, and again, we're using the Rise preset with the in-game settings left at default, which is just the normal settings, but I did adjust the in-game resolution scaling to 0.75 with the resolution set to 720p, but the frame rate set to 120 frames per second, and believe it or not, this game is getting as high as 120 frames per second, depending on what is happening on screen, which is just really incredible to see here. This is easily an area that I could spend an entire video on just exploring all the capabilities between both Gamehub and Winlator, and the sheer amount of gaming that opens up thanks to these solutions. Now speaking of solutions, one last thing before we move on to battery testing, I always like to see how these devices handle local game streaming using a combination of Artemis and Apollo, which is a great way to fully utilize the 144Hz refresh rate display here with the 11 Pro, and I've got Hollow Knight Silksong running here streaming from my local PC to the 11 Pro at 144 frames per second at the 11 Pro's native resolution, so we're getting that ultra wide goodness here with Silksong, and the experience is unsurprisingly excellent based on just what we saw with the prior generation of the 8 Elite. The same story remains here with the 8 Elite Gen 5, and we're looking at sub 2 millisecond decoding times, which is excellent given that this is at 144 frames per second and at a resolution of 2688 by 1216. And performance should be even better if you just stick to 1080p and a lower frame rate if you prefer, but honestly, with this kind of performance, why would you? And finally, after all this gaming, how does the REDMAGIC 11 Pro fare with its larger 7500 mAh battery and the combination of this larger capacity as well as the improved efficiency of the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5, which has really resulted in some very impressive performance. And with my usual lightest test using Yoshi's Island for Super Nintendo, I have the REDMAGIC 11 Pro set to use the Eco preset with a 50% brightness and volume, the battery saver option turned on at 60Hz with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, as well as the fan and liquid cooling turned off. And I believe we have a new record for this game on the channel, with a whopping 24.5 hours of on-screen time. And so if you were ever in a situation that you needed to play 24 hours worth of Super Nintendo, this 11 Pro might just be your device. The excellent battery performance continues to translate into some more demanding games, and this time I've got God of War 2 for the PlayStation 2 using Nether SX2 with 3 times the native PlayStation 2 resolution, and the same Eco preset with 50% brightness and volume, 60Hz, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned off, as well as the balanced fan option turned on and liquid cooling turned on, and God of War 2 managed over 7.5 hours of on-screen time. And if you noticed, performance remained steady throughout the entirety of the testing. This highlights not only really solid performance with just the Eco preset, but also the efficiency of the 8 Elite Gen 5, and it's truly remarkable to see this kind of battery life for a game like this in a device this compact. Now, I did mention earlier on in the emulation section that I did a battery test for the first time ever with Super Mario Odyssey, which is a Switch game using the Eden emulator, and for this one, once again I am using that surprisingly powerful Eco preset with the 60Hz option, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned off, as well as the balanced fan option and liquid cooling both turned on. And I have Mario Odyssey here running at the Switch's native resolution, but in docked mode, and it's no surprise why a certain company doesn't care much for emulation, because not only are we seeing better battery life, we're also getting better performance. And for this test, Mario Odyssey clocked a little over 6.5 hours of on-screen time, which is just absolutely insane. Finally, in terms of charging time, I took a look at the percentage after 30 minutes using the included 80-watt power adapter, which gave us about a 55% charge, and then a full 0% to 100% charge with the included 80-watt power adapter took about 1 hour and 5 minutes, which means that it doesn't take a whole lot of time to get right back into the action with the REDMAGIC 11 Pro. And so, it's time for this video to come to an end, and I think it goes without saying that the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 definitely is an excellent performer, and the combination of REDMAGIC's gaming-focused features, like that vapor chamber which is better than ever, really makes for an excellent gaming experience that can handle pretty much everything that the world of Android can offer, including some pretty heavy emulation and PC gaming, which will only get better with time. I think for anyone that is looking for a gaming-centric mobile device, the REDMAGIC 11 Pro is definitely one that should be at the top of your list for consideration, and personally, I am excited to dive into the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 a bit more with some further videos in the future. But until then, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.